Fleshrender is by far the best bossing build of the season. Just watch me one-shot this boss with a 4-man group. And if the boss hadn't died instantly, I can spam non-stop and deal insane damage. But this build is not only a bosser, it also has great AoE clear, and you're constantly pulling in enemies, and that's if they don't die instantly. If you're doing T4 overworld content, everything will die as soon as you cast your ultimate. And if you're doing pits, you're going to drag everything to you and continue to do crazy DPS. Now, before I get into the specifics of the build, make sure you drop a like, comment, and subscribe, and follow me on Twitch at twitch.tv/screamheart. I'm going live almost every day, so I'll see you there. Now, let me show you how the build works. So first, let me talk about the interactions that make this build happen. First, the number one thing that you need is Fleshrender. And by the way, ignore these 4 GA items that I have, because my community hooked me up in my last stream. I don't normally have stuff this good in a build, but this could already clear Pit 100 before I had this. So basically how this works is this has a passive that makes you deal damage every time you use a defensive skill. And then we have Erida's that's also doing damage every time we cast an ultimate. Erida's gives us a bunch of cooldown reduction for our ultimate, and our rank 5 bonus for our ultimate resets all of our cooldowns. So what this combination allows us to do is if we get enough cooldown reduction, our ult will be under 10 seconds, and that allows us to spam constantly on bosses. So here's an example. Now that's just the ultimate damage. That's actually the smaller portion of our damage. The main part of our damage is coming from our Bulwark. Our Bulwark is triggering our Fleshrender, and because we're using Bulwark, that means that we're also making this passive an Earth skill, and because we're using Vasilis, it's also a Werebear skill. So that opens up a lot of different modifiers to increase the damage. Now this build's a little more complicated than average, so I'm actually going to take you guys into the pits, but let me explain a little bit more before I do that. So like I said, we want to get our ultimate's cooldown under 10 seconds after everything is active. So if we activate our Hurricane, you can see that we're down to 9 seconds. The reason the Hurricane helped with that is because we're using Storm Shifter's aspect, which gives us more ranks to our ultimate, therefore reducing the cooldown. We also have a bunch of cooldown reduction coming from the Eridas, some tempers on our amulet and our ring, cooldown on our totem, and we're also using the seasonal thing that lets our catalyst skill get 25% cooldown reduction. So the lower the cooldown for the ultimate, the better, because using the ultimate is what's going to reset our other cooldowns. But we have a little bit more when it comes to cooling down our ultimate. So first off, Fists of Fate gives us a huge amount of lucky hit chance. And for our Spirit Boons, we've got Calm Before the Storm. When we get lucky hit chances with this, we're reducing the ultimate cooldown by 2 seconds. That means the more enemies you have around as you're casting your ultimate, the more likely you're going to get an instant reset on it. So not only is it good to pull enemies together, but it's also good to have high lucky hit chance. Now normally, that wouldn't be good enough because of consistency reasons. And so you normally want to use Flicker Step in the build. The problem with Flicker Step is it reduces the amount of willpower you can get, and the passive on Fleshrender scales off willpower, so it's very important. We're also scaling our Erida's damage with willpower. In fact, you can see at the bottom there, it says 60,000% damage. So it's kind of insane. So what I'm doing instead of Flicker Step is I'm going with Ursine Horror on my boots, and this is actually going to help us in 2 different ways. One, it gives us Pulverize that increases the damage enemies take by 20% whenever we hit them with it. But it's also making Pulverize an Earth skill, which means that it can proc Calm Before the Storm for that lucky hit chance. So we can spam this between to make sure we get our ultimate. And when we overpower with our Pulverize, we're reducing our Earth skill cooldowns by 1.5 seconds. So it's a chance to reduce our ultimate and a guarantee to reduce our ultimate when we get an overpower. So if I set this to normal enemies and I come over here and I use my ult, you can see that I got 10 seconds on my cooldown basically. That means I didn't get any Calm Before the Storm procs. And don't worry, because normally when you're out in an area, you're going to have way more than 5 enemies that you can pull together. So this will reset much more consistently. But say it doesn't reset and you get the full cooldown, you can use the Pulverize, and you can see that we got a big chunk off just from hitting with Pulverize. And again, you're going to have more enemies when you're out in an actual dungeon. So this will be extremely consistent. So here's an example of me spamming just on 5 enemies. You can see that we burnt the cooldown pretty quickly. But I'll show you this in actual practice because it's much better when you're in a dungeon. Now I've already talked about a lot of the specifics of the different items, so I may as well just finish up the items and then we'll move to the actual gameplay. So some of the other stuff that we're using is Vehement Brawlers, and this one's increasing your damage by 30%, but it's also giving you additional ranks to your ultimate. However, you can actually swap this one out for more damage and go with the Virulent aspect and swap your Claw for Rabies. And that'll give you a bigger damage multiplier, but it's going to increase your cooldown for your ultimate, so make sure you manage that if you do the change. Other than that, on our amulet, we're going with Natural Balance. And the only thing to know about this is that it increases our damage for a few seconds after using a storm skill. So make sure you're also casting your hurricane often enough to keep that damage up. We're also using Changeling's Debt, which is just a big damage multiplier while we're in werebear form. And you can see I actually have a pretty bad aspect here, unfortunately. Finally, the only other item I haven't covered is the Shroud of False Death, and this is just going to give you a lot of additional damage and survivability from our skill tree. All right, so now we're in a pit, and I'm going to show you guys a little bit of how the build actually works in practice. So as per usual with builds, you can go between your claw and your pulverize when you first get into a dungeon. That's going to give you some quick shift stacks. But in this build, you're not stuck in Grizzly Rage, so you can actually get these naturally as you play the build, but feel free to do it at the beginning if you want. All right, so the first thing we're doing is we're gonna pop our Hurricane, may as well pop our Debilitating Roar, and then we're gonna use our ult, which will pull everything in. Now that everything's next to us, we're gonna keep spamming our ultimate and our Bulwark back and forth. Now, just an example here, this is what you don't want to be doing. You don't want to get one enemy left, or a couple of enemies left, and sit here fiddling with the one enemy or the two enemies, because you can kill them, but it's gonna waste your time. What you really want to do is move through the dungeon, collect as many enemies as possible, and just yank them all together, and you can get as many groups as you can handle. And then once you get them all together, that's when you want to go ham and start really spamming, because you can see now that it's very easy to spam back and forth. Now there's a bunch of enemies, and of course we had a couple that didn't die, so you can pull these to the next group, or you can sit here and fiddle with them, but typically you want to move to the next group. Now, if you're not a fan of trying to leash big groups of enemies together, and you just want to kill small piles of enemies, then I highly recommend that you just stick with Flicker Step, because this setup requires you to actually actively pull enemies together in order to maintain your cooldowns fairly easily. So this is what a proper pull looks like. Once you've got this many enemies, you can just go to town. All right, now for the magic of the build, we're going to the boss. So pretty much for the boss, all I was doing there was alternating back and forth between my ultimate and my Earthen Bulwark, and periodically casting my Pulverize, Claw, Hurricane, and Debilitating Roar to amplify my damage. All right, now let me walk you through the rest of the details of the build. So for the stats on gear, I highly recommend going and checking out my written guide in the link below the video. It's the first link directly under the video if you can't find it. For the gems, you're going to want to go for Sapphire on the armor to get as much willpower as possible. For the runes, we're going with Zon, and this is going to provide us the guaranteed critical strikes and overpowers that you see a lot. And then we're also going with Yule Cox, and this one's going to give us increased damage based on our current spirit. For the gems and our weapons, we're going with overpower damage. For our seasonal gems, we're going with the Idle from Below for the increased primary stat and max life, Scornful Light for the 20% damage, and the one that gives 25% cooldown reduction, which I forgot the name of. For our spirit boons, we're going with Gift of the Stag. This is just going to help us keep our spirit topped off, but this one's less important, so if you need the damage reduction, go for Wariness. For our Eagle spirit boons, we're going to go Swooping Attacks and Avian Wrath, but if you don't really need the extra DPS, swap Swooping Attacks for the Iron Feather, because that's a lot of extra survivability. For Wolf, we're going with Energize, and this is going to help us keep our spirit up, but I have gone without this, and the spirit's not too bad, and you don't actually require spirit in the build, it's just giving you that extra damage. So if you'd like to take something else here, feel free to go for it. A big brain interesting play that you could try is going with Pack Leader instead, and then instead of Vehement Brawler, you could go with Subterranean Aspect. That's going to give you increased damage, but it's also going to make it to where you could run Poison Creeper, and because you're resetting your cooldowns, you could spam Poison Creeper constantly, plus on top of the fact that you're getting it from Pack Leader, and you have so many landslides that hit from the Poison Creeper that would give you almost guaranteed chance to trigger your Calm Before the Storm and reset your ultimate. So if you feel like Pulverize isn't doing it for you, try that one out. For our Snake Spirit boon, we're going with Calm Before the Storm for the ultimate cooldown reduction. In the skill tree, we're going 2 points into Claw just so we can move to the next part of the tree. But using Claw occasionally is also going to activate our doubling for our Toxic Claws. In the next part of the tree, we're grabbing our Pulverize and the Raging Pulverize for that extra damage and whatnot. We're going to get Iron Fur for damage reduction. In the next part of the tree, we're getting our Earthen Bulwark and going to Innate Earthen Bulwark for some extra damage. We're maxing out Backlash, and you can see we get 19 ranks here between our GA weapon that's fully masterworked and the 3 points here plus the Shroud. So that's a 76% damage increase. Kind of crazy. We're maxing out Ancestral Fortitude in order to get our resistances, Vigilance for damage reduction, Debilitating Roar, going to Innate Debilitating Roar for more damage. We're maxing out Nature's Reach for the little bit of damage we get to do to enemies that are further away from us. And this is extra useful if you decide to go with Cyclone Armor, You can go Cyclone Armor and push enemies away to get 15% more damage, but I find it a little weird because you're constantly pushing enemies away, bringing them back, and I don't think it's as consistent for keeping all the enemies damaged, but feel free to run that if you want to. It also makes the build a little more piano-y, where you have to press more keys, and it's kind of annoying. We're also going for Feral Aptitude for more damage, along with Envenom, Toxic Claws, Defiance, Natural Disaster, Resonance, Catastrophe, and Quick Shift for additional damage. We're going with Hurricane and Savage Hurricane. This is going to reduce enemy damage, but this is also what we're using for that natural balance aspect, so make sure you're hitting this regularly. Also, when I was going through the damage passives, I forgot to mention Crushing Earth and Stone Guard, which are also there for damage. We're maxing out our ultimate and both additional points, and then Heightened Senses for damage reduction and movement speed. For a Keystone passive, we're going with Ursine Strength, because this is going to give us not only survivability, but a bunch more damage and overpower damage. For the Paragon boards, we're going with Headhunter on the first board. On the next board, we're going Heightened Malice with the Spirit Glyph. To the left from there, we're going with our Survival Instincts and the Keeper Glyph. Down from there, we're going with Ancestral Guidance, and here we're going with Dominate. Keep in mind that Ancestral Guidance is not going to trigger unless you have the rune that's spending your spirit, so fairly important. And also keep in mind that these are my specific trees. If you go to the written guide, you're going to get the laid out full detailed guide. And I'll also have a mid-game one there that has less points, so you can do it earlier on as well. The mid-game guide will also have the build set up without any mythic items. Moving down from here, we're putting our last board on, which is Earth and Devastation, and here we're going with Earth and Sky. For our mercenaries, I'm going with Rahir and Varyana. For Varyana, I'm just going with Bloodthirst for a little bit of extra attack speed. And for Rahir, I'm going with this side so I can get the 15% resistances and a little extra damage. For consumables, I like to go with Elixir of Advantage for the attack speed and the lucky hit chance. You can go for survivability with Elixir of Fortitude if you need to. I go for Blessed Guide for the willpower, Redamine Buzz for the life, but you can also go armor here, and Soothing Spices for the all resist. This also gives you a little bit of armor, so it's another way to get a bit more. You can see here that I'm in Torment 4. We have all of our resists maxed out, and we have way more than enough armor. I kind of have a ridiculous amount of armor, but I guess that happens naturally when you have Vasily's Prayer. Now, I'm sure this build's going to come with a lot of questions because this one's a little more complicated, so I'm going to cover a few of the most important things one more time and maybe cover some new stuff. So first off, your ultimate needs to be under 10 seconds once everything is activated. That means once your Hurricane is active, for your Storm Shifters, give extra skill ranks. That means using Vehement Brawlers for 2 extra skill ranks. Maxing out your skill in the skill tree for your ultimate, running the seasonal gem with a 25% cooldown, master working as much cooldown as you can on your ring, and getting your 2 cooldown tempers, and your cooldown on your totem. So make sure you use everything you need to get this under that 10 seconds. If you need to, you can swap your boots out for Rakanoth's Wake, which will give you more cooldown reduction, and you can do that earlier. I'll include that in the mid-game guide for you guys. Now, once your cooldown's under 10 seconds, you have a couple of options. You can either run Ursine Horror and use Pulverize to give you more cooldown, or you can use Flicker Step in your boots and evade through enemies to get more cooldown. Or if you really need a little extra helping hand, there is a rune that reduces ult cooldown, but that's going to cost you some damage, so not recommended. You need to maintain hits on enemies with Pulverize to increase your damage with that. Maintain occasional claw uses in order to get your double toxic claws damage. Maintain occasional debilitating roar to reduce enemy damage, but also increase your damage. Occasional hurricane to activate your natural balance. And your main source that you're going to spam is going to be Petrify and Earth and Bulwark, alternating back and forth. If you use all of those things I just said, you should be good to go. But if you have any more questions, feel free to comment below and I'll answer the best I can. And the best way is probably to come by my Twitch stream at twitch.tv/screamheart and I'll answer any questions you guys have. But that's about it for this video. I appreciate you guys watching and I'll see you guys in my next video. Daddy Druid out.
Subscribe to Screamheart. He's more than an old fart. He makes lots of fun builds. I promise his streams chill. He should probably be faster. Come watch this disaster.